Hi, I'm Delphine, and my son forgot I existed. He didn't even notice when I packed up my things and left, for good. Weeks passed, no call, no knock at the door. And when he finally did reach out, it wasn't to ask if I was okay. It was to ask for money. But that was just the beginning. They forged my name, declared me dead, staged a fake memorial service while I was still alive. How do you fight back when your own family erases you? And how far would they go if you didn't? It was warm that day, unseasonably warm for spring in Plano. The kind of day you'd normally take a walk just to smell the grass after the rain. But I stayed inside, upstairs in the guest room I'd slowly been confined to over the past few months. It was my birthday. I only remembered that because I'd marked it in the small planner I kept beside the bed. No cake, no card, not even a "Happy birthday, Mom." Just the faint noise of laughter downstairs. Bright, sharp, and careless. From where I sat, the voices floated through the vents. Joanne was loud as always, trying too hard to be funny. Bryn's laugh cut through it, brittle like glass. I caught phrases, "We need the space," and "It's just not working with her here anymore." At first, I thought they didn't know I could hear, but then I realized they didn't care. I waited. Maybe someone would knock on the door. Maybe Callum, my grandson, would at least peek in. But the hours passed, and the silence in the hallway stretched longer than any birthday wish could reach. They didn't send a plate, not even a slice of cake. The irony hung thick. I was in the house, under the same roof, while my own birthday was celebrated without me. And not once did anyone mention my name. It wasn't the first time I'd been made invisible. I'd become an expert in fading out, in staying quiet to avoid being labeled difficult or dramatic. But something about that day, maybe the warmth, maybe the way the laughter felt so far away, made it different. I knew I wouldn't be here next year. Not for another ignored birthday. Not for them. That night, long after the last guest left and the laughter gave way to dishwasher hums and the soft clinking of leftover glasses, I started packing. I didn't need much. A few clothes, my birth certificate, the photo of Duran when he was 7, smiling, holding a frog in both hands. I took the letter Luther had written me before he passed, the one he'd hidden in his Bible. I didn't need to read it yet. Just knowing it existed gave me strength. There was no grand confrontation. I wasn't going to throw a fit in the kitchen or make a scene on the porch. I'd given too much of my life to peacekeeping, to silence disguised as grace. But that silence no longer served me. At 5:20 a.m., I slipped on the most comfortable shoes I owned and walked down the stairs like I had every morning for years. Only this time, with a bag on my shoulder and a future in my hands. The kitchen was a mess of empty cups and smeared frosting. I didn't touch a thing. I left a note on the counter, folded in half. It read simply, "I'm leaving. I'll be fine. Don't come looking." No bitterness, just clarity. I stepped into the rideshare I'd booked online. The driver didn't ask questions. We drove in silence for 2 hours, through quiet highways in familiar towns that looked foreign in morning light. By 8:30, I was standing in front of a small apartment complex just outside McKinney, senior-friendly, furnished, and most importantly, mine. The manager handed me the keys without judgment. I signed the lease, using the name I hadn't heard out loud in months, Delphine Vance. Inside, the place smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh paint. I didn't unpack right away. I just opened the window, let in the breeze, and watched the sun rise over unfamiliar trees. No phone calls came that day, or the next, or the one after that. They didn't call. Not after one day, not after a week. A month had passed, and not a single voice from that house found its way to my phone. You'd think someone would ask if I was okay, or maybe notice that my bedroom light hadn't been on. But the only proof that I'd ever been there was the absence of noise I used to make. The silence was thick here too, but it was a different kind. In my little apartment tucked between a laundromat and a strip of dentist offices, Quiet didn't mean being ignored. It meant peace. I'd sit by the window each morning with a cup of black coffee, watching folks walk their dogs or shuffle into the diner across the street. No one knew my name, but no one expected me to clean up after them either. Then one morning, my phone lit up. Just a single word. Joranne. My fingers hovered over the screen. For a second, I thought it might be a mistake. Maybe a pocket dial or one of those accidental FaceTimes. But the screen stayed solid, no movement. He meant to call. I picked up. His voice was rushed, almost out of breath. Hey, Mom. Sorry, I should have called sooner. Look, Callum's in the ER. He had some kind of reaction after lunch at school. We're okay. He's okay. But they ran a bunch of tests and, well, the bill's a mess. I didn't say anything. I listened. He went on. Thing is, Bryn thought maybe you'd still have access to the old joint account from before Dad passed. You know, the one you used to pay for my tuition? Still nothing from me. So, if you could wire about $4,000 over, we'd really appreciate it. Just until things settle. I mean, you're still on the paperwork, right? I waited. Let the pause sit there long enough for the weight of what he didn't say to stretch thin. No, how are you? No, where did you go? No mention of the note I'd left. Not even a pretend concern that I'd disappeared. I stood up slowly and walked over to my dresser. On top sat a photo in a chipped silver frame, me and Joranne when he was 7. He had a grin so big he could have swallowed the sun. I was kneeling beside him, proud and tired. It was taken the day he won second place in the science fair with that crooked volcano made of papier-mâché and food coloring. Holding the phone to my ear with one hand, I picked up the frame with the other. Do you remember this photo? I asked, interrupting his sentence about insurance deductibles. There was a pause, then an awkward chuckle. What? Oh, that. I think we tossed those boxes when we redid the closet. Bryn wanted to make space. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I see. More silence. You still there? He asked. I'm not sure I have what you need anymore, I said softly. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was with a shallow breath and a clipped, Okay, well, let us know. I hung up before he could finish the sentence. My fingers trembled slightly, not from sadness, but from something else. A quiet finality. I stared at the frame again, placed it back in its spot on the dresser like it was an offering. I remember, I said aloud, even if you don't. Later that afternoon, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded a throw blanket over the edge of the couch, made myself a sandwich, and opened a book I'd been pretending to read for days. Still, every few minutes, I'd glance at my phone, half waiting, but it stayed black, silent. That call wasn't meant to find me. It was meant to find my money. I wasn't a mother in that conversation. I was a lifeline they hadn't expected to lose. And somewhere between that realization and the night creeping in through the blinds, I stopped waiting for another ring. That's when I received the envelope, my own letter, unopened, returned to sender. The envelope didn't look like much. Plain white, slightly bent at the edges. No return address. It sat quietly in my mailbox between a grocery store flyer and a senior center bulletin, but the handwriting on it stopped me cold. It was mine. I recognized the way I looped my L's and crossed my T's with more care than necessary. The slant, the pressure. I'd written this envelope myself, weeks ago. The return stamp in red, barely smudged, read, "Refused, return to sender." I carried it inside without opening the rest of my mail. My hands were steady, my breathing wasn't. On my small kitchen table, I set it down. Just looked at it for a long while. It felt heavier than it should have been, like it was soaked in something invisible. Not rain, not dust, intent. I had written that letter the night before I left, thought carefully about every sentence, chose my words not to guilt them, but to give them clarity. It was never a dramatic goodbye. It was a peace offering, my truth, tied in ink. And they sent it back. They didn't lose it. They didn't forget to open it. They received it, saw my name on the front, and decided it wasn't worth reading. I remembered sitting at the desk in the room I used to sleep in, using Duran's old school pen, the one he'd left behind when he moved to college. It scratched a little on the paper, skipped when the ink dried out. But I kept going. I told them about the years I bit my tongue, how I'd made myself small so they could feel big, how I'd stayed because I believed being present was the same as being needed. I wrote, "I'm not angry anymore. I just need to be seen as someone other than what you take for granted." It was quiet in that apartment as I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out the copy I'd kept. I didn't intend to read it again, but my eyes traced the lines anyway. "I raised you to speak the truth. I'm sorry you've forgotten how to hear it." That sentence, fourth paragraph. I remembered holding the pen above the paper, hesitating before I wrote it down. It had taken everything in me to say that without rage, and yet that envelope sat sealed, the truth inside it untouched. Unopened letters hold a different kind of pain. They're not confrontational, they're dismissive. There's no screaming, no reply, just a quiet, brutal refusal to even engage. It's not that they didn't care, it's that they decided my words weren't worth the effort of their eyes. I laid the sealed letter next to the open copy. One honest, the other rejected, and it hit me. I kept one to remember, and they returned the other to forget. For some reason, that cut deeper than anything they'd ever said. I didn't cry. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I just sat in the kitchen, the smell of reheated soup from earlier still lingering in the air, and started reading aloud. Not to them. To myself. I carried you when you had fevers. I stayed up nights wondering how I could do better. But I see now, no matter what I did, it was never visible unless you needed something. The words weren't new, but speaking them aloud felt like picking a scab just to prove it still bled. "If I'm not seen, even in goodbye," I whispered, "then perhaps I never existed to you at all." That night, after washing the dishes and folding the last of my laundry, I carried the envelope out to the small patio behind my apartment. I found a metal tray I'd bought from a garage sale and placed the letter inside. I struck a match, something I hadn't done in decades, and held it for a few seconds before dropping it onto the paper. The flames curled through the corners of the envelope, slow and quiet. I watched the seal crackle, the ink blacken, the return to sender stamp vanish under the glow. "That was for them," I murmured. "The words they'll never deserve to read." A week later, a manila envelope arrived, with a smiling stamp and a legal signature inside. The manila envelope showed up late Tuesday, tucked under a stack of junk mail like it belonged there. It was clean, too clean. Typed labels, no handwriting, no stamp from a person, just the hollow cold of a commercial postage mark. There was something about its weight that felt heavier than it should have been, like a lie wrapped in printer paper. I laid it on my kitchen table, opened it slowly. Inside was a packet labeled Financial Coordination Agreement, and on top, a cover note that read, "Hi Mom, just need your signature on this to help us finalize refinancing. No big deal, thanks." It was signed, but not by hand. Just Brennan Duran, in italics. Cute. I didn't touch it right away. I made tea first. Boiled water, poured slowly. It helped me think. I'd learned in the last few weeks that answers come slower, but cleaner, when you don't chase them. By the time I sat down again, the steam was already curling off the mug. I read every word, line by line. At first glance, it looked harmless. But the deeper I went, the more the language bent in on itself. Phrases like authority to act in absence, decision facilitation, streamlined asset access. Not illegal, just dishonest. It wasn't a refinancing agreement. It was a disguised power of attorney. I folded the pages and put them back in the envelope. Not because I was finished, but because I knew someone who'd help me read it the right way. Richard Steinberg, retired attorney, 2 blocks down, still kept his brain sharper than his garden shears. I brought it to him after lunch. He flipped through the pages with a half laugh. "They're slick," he muttered, "but not slick enough. His tone shifted when he reached the last page. This clause right here, they're trying to make you an invisible co-signer on everything. They could sell your house, your savings, your name, without asking again. I didn't flinch. That's what I thought. He looked at me for a moment, like he was about to apologize for humanity. Want me to call them? I shook my head. No, I'll handle it. On the walk back home, the heat pressed against me, thick and damp. It brought memories with it. Summer days when Joran was a boy, chasing the ice cream truck barefoot, cheeks red with sun and sugar. The time he bought a plot of land with a partner who disappeared 2 months later, leaving me to cover the bank fees to keep him from losing the truck he was still paying off. I'd helped before, without hesitation, without gratitude in return. Now they wanted me to sign over everything, not to help, to disappear. I sat down at the table again, this time with intention. Pen in hand, I stared at the signature line. Instead of writing my name, I wrote a note on a fresh sheet of paper. If you need help, try honesty for once. Underneath, I printed out the property deed from my files. Still in my name, never transferred. I circled it with a red marker, just like I used to grade Joran's math homework when he was 10. I placed the whole packet neatly back into the envelope, sealed it with a strip of packing tape, and wrote in bold across the back, "Returned, do not resend." Next morning, I visited the local notary. The clerk, a woman named Martha, who wore readers on a chain and spoke with a slow Texas rhythm, helped me draft a formal rejection of the power of attorney. I signed it in front of her, and we both initialed the corners. I paid extra for tracking and delivery confirmation, because if they were going to play with paperwork, I'd match them. Signature for signature, proof for proof. Before I dropped it off at the post office, I made one more copy and slipped it into a brown folder I labeled, "If they try again." Back at home, I made myself a sandwich, added a slice of tomato like Luther always did, and sat by the window. The quiet outside wasn't peaceful today. It was waiting. They'd opened this chapter with legal games. I knew better than to believe it would end there. The phone rang just past noon. I was sorting laundry, towels mostly, and sipping lukewarm coffee when it buzzed on the table. The caller ID said, Bryn. I didn't pick up right away. I watched the name flash, then fade, then light up again a second time. I answered on the third ring. Delphine, she said, her voice honey-sweet, all Midwestern warmth she only put on when she wanted something. Hi! I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I told her she already had. There was a laugh, light, practiced. Listen, I know things have been complicated lately, but Joran is giving a speech this Saturday at the community center. It's a big deal, launching his campaign for city council. We'd love for you to come. As family. I didn't respond. We're putting together a little photo wall. Memories, you know? You're in a few of them. People would love to see you there. It would mean a lot. After the call ended, I sat there with the phone still in my hand. I wasn't naive. I knew the tone people used when they wanted to repackage history. They weren't reaching out for reconciliation. They were reaching for optics. Later that day, I opened my laptop and searched for the event online. Took less than a minute to find the flyer. Joran's face, full smile, arms crossed in front of a generic downtown skyline. Joran Vance, family first, printed across the bottom. I scrolled further. Photos, old ones, some clearly pulled from my own Facebook account. There I was at Callum's birthday party from 4 years ago, holding the cake. There was Luther's funeral photo, cropped to leave out the gravestone. My name was listed in the event description as a pillar of strength in Joran's life. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. They didn't want me there. They needed me there. Saturday arrived too quickly. I considered not going. But then I thought about something Luther used to say. Sometimes it's not about showing up for them. It's about showing up for yourself. So I did. I arrived early, before the crowd, before the music. Volunteers were taping banners along the windows and setting up folding chairs in neat rows. I walked through the lobby slowly, observing the details like I was stepping onto a movie set. Everything was curated, polished. Near the entrance stood a life-size cardboard cutout of Duran. Behind it, a table with glossy brochures fanned out beside bottles of water. I picked one up. Same photo, same slogan. The tagline under his name read, "Guided by family, grounded by love." I let out a quiet breath, half a scoff. A young man in a polo shirt smiled at me. "Are you with the campaign team?" I shook my head. "Not exactly." I waited in the back of the room, leaning against the wall until I saw Duran. He was shaking hands with a local pastor and nodding along to whatever was being said. When he finally noticed me, he walked over, eyes lighting up like he hadn't ignored every message I didn't send. "Mom," he said, putting his hands out in an almost hug. "Wow, you came!" I didn't move. He looked me over, then motioned to the chairs. "It's going to be great. All you have to do is sit up front, smile when the camera pans. Nothing big." "You don't need a mother today, Duran," I said evenly. "You need a mascot." He blinked. I turned, walked out before the music started. I didn't wait to see his face crumble or recover. I didn't give him that. The parking lot was quiet. A breeze cut through the heat, carrying the scent of fresh mulch and desperation. I opened my car door, slid in, and started the engine. No tears, just resolve. Back home, I sat at my desk, typed a short message, and hit send. "Don't mistake my silence for weakness. If this goes further, I will go public, with the truth." And that's when the house, the one I still legally owned, vanished from under my name. The email came just after dinner. I had just rinsed my plate, dried my hands on the dish towel, and sat down with a book I wasn't really reading when the notification blinked onto my phone screen. Subject: Property Title Transfer Notice. It was from a free alert system I'd signed up for years ago, one of those tools meant for peace of mind. It worked. Too well. I opened it, already uneasy. According to the message, a title transfer had been filed and processed on the Plano house. My house, the one still legally under my name. I froze. I hadn't signed anything, not since Luther passed. I hadn't given permission, hadn't been notified, hadn't touched a title form in nearly 5 years. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. I sat back, pulled the laptop closer, and logged into the county records website. The air in my chest held itself tight while the page loaded. There it was. Filed. Stamped. Transferred. I stared at the PDF. My name was still there, but it had been marked as previous owner. Duran's name, along with Bryn's, now stood as joint proprietors. I clicked into the document, and there it was. My signature. Only it wasn't. It looked like mine. Almost. But it was off. The loop of the D was too tight, the spacing between letters too even, and whoever forged it had used my old address, not the apartment I lived in now. Panic didn't hit me right away. It was slower, thicker, like honey poured over stone. I kept staring, hoping it would change, but it didn't. So I printed everything and slid the pages into a folder. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. No appointment. Just walked in with my folder, my driver's license, and a face that didn't feel like mine. The woman behind the glass looked up with mild politeness. "Can I help you?" I handed her the paperwork. "I need to challenge a deed transfer. That signature isn't mine." She took the documents, brows furrowing. "Let me get the file." Minutes passed. Too many. She returned and laid a copy of the signed deed on the counter. "This is what we have on record. It's already processed." I stared at it. My name, forged in black ink, sat there like a betrayal made permanent. "That's not my handwriting," I said, each word sharp. She looked uncomfortable. "If you believe there's been fraud, you'll need to file an affidavit of non-consent. We can give you the paperwork." I took the forms and left without another word. Back in my car, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, hands in my lap, eyes forward, and heard my father's voice in my head. He used to say, "When people can't beat you outright, They'll try to erase you. That's what this was. Not just theft, erasure. Back home, I got to work. I called Richard, the retired lawyer down the street. He listened calmly, then told me exactly what to do. I filed the affidavit, requested certified copies of the forged documents, and began building a paper trail of my own. I found old bank statements, prior deeds, even notarized letters from years ago showing my signature. I compared them side by side and printed the best examples. I labeled each one clearly. Proof wasn't about being loud, it was about being thorough. I placed everything into a binder and made 2 copies. One went in my fireproof box. The other, I handed to Ramona, my neighbor, and occasional coffee partner. Just in case, I said. She didn't ask questions, just nodded. That night, I sat with the original forged deed in front of me. I didn't tear it up. I didn't scream. I just looked at it like it was a photograph of someone I no longer recognized. They thought they'd bury me in paperwork, I said aloud, my voice steady. I'll bury them in proof. But they didn't stop. What came next wasn't paperwork. It was a trap wrapped in a smile. It arrived like an afterthought. A white envelope, slightly thick, nestled between a grocery coupon booklet and a church newsletter. The return label was printed, neat, no handwriting, just the words Community Family Remembrance Committee and a local church address I hadn't stepped foot in since Luther's service. Inside was a glossy card bordered in charcoal gray. Centered in a black and white oval was my face. In loving memory of Delphine Vance, it read. I stared at it, unmoving. My hand didn't tremble. My chest didn't collapse. But something in me folded, not because they thought I was dead, but because part of me finally understood how far they were willing to go. There was no mistake, no clerical error. This was a deliberate performance, a staged mourning for a woman who was very much alive, just inconvenient. By noon, I'd made 2 calls, the first to the church hall listed on the card. A soft-voiced secretary confirmed, "Yes, ma'am, we're hosting the remembrance this Sunday. Mr. Vance provided the event details, said you passed peacefully in the spring." I didn't correct her. I thanked her kindly and hung up. The second call was to Richard. He came over within the hour, carrying his briefcase and a tired kind of anger. After scanning the invitation, he sighed. "This isn't about grief. This is about access. If they can declare you mentally unfit or deceased, it gives them leverage." He tapped the card. "This wasn't for you. This was for the probate court." We spent the next few hours combing through documents. Filing a formal protest would take time, but Richard started building a timeline. What mattered most now was proving I was neither incompetent nor gone. And I had just the thing. Weeks before I left Joranne's house, I'd installed a small nanny cam inside the decorative vase in the hallway, something I learned from Ramona after she caught her niece snooping through her jewelry. I pulled out the memory card, plugged it into my laptop, and scrubbed through hours of hallway silence. Then, at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, there it was. Bryn stood by the hall closet, talking low but clear. "She barely moves anymore. She doesn't speak unless spoken to. If we're going to make the case, she's no longer competent. Now's the time," Joranne replied, from just out of frame. "She's practically gone anyway. What's a signature or 2? My stomach turned, but I kept watching. I mean, she doesn't even notice when we throw stuff out. She wouldn't know if the house changed hands tomorrow. And that was that. Proof. I emailed the clip to Richard immediately. He responded within minutes. "We'll file an emergency stop order first thing tomorrow." Then I composed an email of my own. Subject. I'm still here. Joranne, I may be invisible to you, but I'm not dead. And now, I'm very awake. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. That night, once the house dimmed and quiet took its place again, I sat on the edge of my bed. The air was cool through the cracked window, but my hands were warm from holding too much emotion all day. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I let the tears fall. Not because I was weak, not because I regretted anything, But because betrayal this calculated wasn't just cruel, it was intimate. They hadn't tried to hurt me accidentally. They had mapped it out. Still, I didn't cry long, just enough. After drying my face, I opened my filing cabinet and began organizing everything: copies of the deed, voice memos, dates, statements. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about identity, about no longer being erased, even if I was never embraced. And when they came knocking next, they didn't bring papers. They brought lawyers. I woke up the next morning with clarity, the kind that doesn't beg for coffee or reassurance, the kind that settles in your chest and just knows. They'd forged my signature, staged my death, stood in front of a church crowd to pretend they mourned me. But I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I'd been before. Something colder had taken its place, something stronger. I had one thing left they hadn't taken, one choice still mine, and it would be the one that ended it all. That afternoon, I walked into Richard's office. His receptionist smiled politely and waved me in. He was already waiting, jacket off, sleeves rolled. I sat across from him, my fingers gripping a folder I'd been filling for weeks. "I want to change my will," I said. Richard blinked, then nodded. "You're sure?" "As sure as I've ever been." We spent the next 2 hours tearing apart the old documents, line by line. Every reference to Joran and Bryn was removed. Every clause naming them as executors or heirs deleted. In their place, I named the foundation I'd quietly started donating to over the past year, an organization helping seniors who'd been abandoned by their families. I didn't just want them out. I wanted someone else in. When it was time to sign, I held the pen steady. My signature didn't shake. Then I pulled out a letter I'd written the night before, folded neatly in my purse. Richard glanced at me. "I want this included with the will, just in case anyone ever questions why." He read it silently, lips pressed together. Then he nodded again, slower this time. The letter was short. "To whomever finds this, family is not who shares your blood. It's who remembers your name when you're gone. It's who protects you, even when no one else is watching. I gave everything I had to people who saw me as convenient until I wasn't. This time, I choose who gets my name." Delphine Vance. 2 days later, Richard filed everything with the court and sent out formal notices. Joran and Bryn received theirs first. I knew because Bryn emailed me an hour later. Subject: "What the hell is this?" I didn't reply. The next morning, Joran called. I let it ring. Then he texted, "You're really going to do this? After everything we've been through?" Yes, I thought. Exactly because of everything we've been through. I didn't need to fight them anymore. The papers did it for me. Later that week, I logged into the nonprofit's Facebook page. They had just posted about their upcoming winter coat drive. I sent them a short message, and they offered to let me write a small donor note for the website. I wrote, "I was erased from their hearts, but I wrote myself into history. This gift is for every woman who was told she was too much, too quiet, too old, too tired. We're not gone. We're still here." They posted it with a photo of a donated coat rack and a line that said, "Gifted in memory of the living." And that night, I finally breathed. For the first time in years, I felt no tension in my chest, no invisible rope tying me to people who used me like an umbrella, only useful when they needed cover. They pushed. I pushed back. But now, I'd stepped off their board entirely. A knock came at my door the next evening. It wasn't them. Just Ramona, holding 2 cups of cocoa. We sat on the porch and didn't talk much. She didn't ask about the will. She just passed me the mug and said, "You look taller today." I laughed. "I feel lighter." Before bed, I stood in front of my mirror, opened the drawer where I kept Luther's old Marine Corps pin, and clipped it to my cardigan. "They don't get to say the last word," I whispered. "I do." And in that moment of peace, I opened a letter that reminded me, some ties still matter. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I pulled the drawer open and found it. Luther's handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. Blocky, deliberate, with a slight upward tilt he'd never corrected. I didn't remember tucking it inside the old gardening book, but there it was, nestled between yellowed pages about pruning hydrangeas. The front simply read, "For when you feel forgotten." I sat down at the kitchen table, sunlight leaking through the blinds, and opened it with the same care I once used to pack his uniforms. Inside, his words were soft, measured. "If you're reading this," he began, "then I imagine the silence around you has grown louder than comfort. I need you to remember something. What they forget doesn't erase who you are." He'd written it months before the cancer got too loud to let him write anything at all. He told me he worried not about dying, but about how easily people forget the roots they grow from. "They'll grow tall," he wrote, "but some forget to look down. You were the ground beneath them, Delphine. Don't let them make you doubt it." And then, at the bottom, the words that stopped me cold. "Don't let them turn your silence into shame. Let it be your shield." I folded the letter slowly and pressed it against my chest, letting the quiet do its work. For the first time in a long while, I cried. Not from defeat, but from remembering I'd once been loved that clearly. Later that afternoon, as I was washing dishes, my phone chimed with a message. It was a video from Callum. I hadn't heard from my grandson since before all this began. When I opened the message, his freckled face filled the screen, earnest and unsure. "Hi, Grandma," he said, voice soft. "Dad said you left because you didn't love us anymore, but I don't believe that." He held up a drawing, him and me standing in front of a little house with a big sun above it. We were holding hands. My stick figure hair was wild, just like he used to draw it. "I miss you," he added. "I hope we can still visit sometime." I watched it 3 times. It didn't undo anything. It didn't erase court documents, forged signatures, or hollow invitations. But it did something else. Maybe love doesn't need a crowd, I whispered to myself. Maybe it just needs one brave heart. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing Callum a letter. No bitterness, no agenda, just love in its purest, quietest form. I told him I missed him too, that grown-ups sometimes make mistakes, and that I hoped one day he'd come visit the apartment with the green chairs and the window that lets in the morning birdsong. I told him his drawing was perfect. I didn't mention his parents. I didn't need to. When I finished, I looked around the room. The soft lamplight, the smell of cinnamon tea. Everything was mine. Earned, defended, kept. I thought about everything I'd lost, what they'd tried to steal, the versions of me they'd buried in old photos and campaign slogans. And still, here I was. They didn't return what they took, but I stopped letting them take more. The next morning, I gathered the last of my old belongings, things from the Plano house I'd kept out of habit more than sentiment. I boxed them neatly and dropped them off at the donation center. No second thoughts. Then I drove to the nonprofit office, ready to start my volunteer orientation. They handed me a badge with my name on it. No title, no label. Just Delphine. "This time," I said as I clipped it on, "I choose who I belong to." In the end, I didn't win a battle. I reclaimed my place, not as someone to be feared or forgotten, but as someone who decided where her story would go. We don't always get the closure we expect from others, but we can give it to ourselves. That's what I've learned. If you've ever felt erased, invisible, or quietly pushed aside, know this: your voice still matters. You still matter. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply not disappear. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away to protect your peace? Do you believe family is earned, not inherited? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, let me know by commenting 1 or telling me where you're watching from. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Let's keep these conversations going, because your story matters too.